Ever feel like the tech world is a battlefield?
Kind of, yeah.
Well, today we're diving deep into one of the biggest showdowns out there.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Huawei versus NVIDIA.
The battle for AI chip dominance.
We've got some really cool excerpts from this video that breaks down Huawei's whole journey.
It's a wild ride.
How U.S. sanctions almost took them down, but they're coming back swinging, ready to take on NVIDIA.
Especially in the Chinese market.
A market NVIDIA can't afford to lose.
Not at all. What's crazy is, back in 2003, Motorola almost bought Huawei.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Liked it.
For $7.5 billion.
Wow. What happened?
Motorola got cold feet.
Really?
They thought the price was too high?
$7.5 billion, that's chump change for a company like that.
Right. It's funny because Motorola's mobile phone business ended up being sold off later.
You're kidding.
And Huawei, they just blew up.
Became a global giant.
They even beat Samsung in smartphone sales at one point.
Talk about missed opportunity for Motorola.
For sure, but then things changed for Huawei, right?
Yeah, that's when the U.S. campaign against them started.
Around 2017.
Right around then.
The U.S. government started taking action.
Over national security concerns.
Exactly. First, the National Defense Authorization Act.
Banning government agencies from using Huawei equipment.
Then came the blacklisting.
Restrictions on foreign companies doing business with Huawei.
And finally, the FCC declared Huawei a national security threat.
So what happened to Huawei after all of that? I mean, did they just crumble?
Well, their sales did plummet almost 30% in 2021.
Ouch.
Their net profits crashed by like 70% the next year.
Wow. 70%.
And basically their entire international mobile phone business
Gone.
gone.
So they were really fighting for survival.
They were. Their founder, Ren Zhengfei, even said so.
It was a tough time. But then instead of giving up, Huawei pulled off this incredible comeback.
Right, like a total underdog story.
What did they do?
Ren Zhengfei rallied his employees.
How?
He told them to pick up the guns, tie ropes to the tanks.
That's pretty intense.
He was basically saying, innovate, be resilient.
And they did it.
They went into overdrive.
Building their own supply chains, becoming self-sufficient.
They exceeded everyone's expectations.
Remember when they launched the Mate 60 Pro?
That was huge.
So like a statement.
Totally. They unveiled this phone, powered by a 5G chip they made entirely in China,
And get this.
right as the U.S. Commerce Secretary was visiting.
No way.
A total power move.
So they figured out the chip thing.
But don't forget NVIDIA.
They're still the leader in AI chips.
They are, but the U.S. put restrictions on NVIDIA.
So they can't sell their most advanced chips to China.
Exactly. The A100 and the H100.
And that's where Huawei saw an opportunity.
A huge one.
And they stepped in with the Ascend 910C.
Bingo. Their answer to NVIDIA's H100.
It matches its performance.
Head-to-head.
So big Chinese companies like ByteDance and Baidu, are they using it?
They are. NVIDIA's kind of stuck now.
Between a rock and a hard place.
Trying to follow U.S. restrictions, but also not lose the massive Chinese market.
It's a tough spot to be in. Huawei's strategy goes beyond just making one chip, though, right?
Way beyond.
It's like a whole ecosystem.
Right. They call it the Hubble investment strategy.
Hubble, like the telescope.
Exactly. They're acquiring stakes in dozens of suppliers.
It's about building domestic expertise and reducing their dependence on foreign technology.
Exactly. It's a long game.
And they're playing it masterfully. Like, what kind of suppliers are we talking about?
Their example, Focus Light Technologies.
What do?
They supply these incredibly precise laser components.
For lithography machines.
Yeah, those things are crucial for making chips.
Like super precise printers.
Right. Etching those tiny circuits onto silicon wafers.
So Huawei invested in them,
They did.
helping them overcome technological hurdles.
Breaking a foreign monopoly.
The U.S. must be having a hard time countering that.
They are. Huawei's not just focusing on one part of the process. They're investing in the whole supply chain.
And they're dominating the silicon carbide market too, right?
Oh, yeah. Silicon carbide chips, they're used in electric vehicles, green energy.
It was a German company, Infineon, leading that market.
That's right. What happened? Hubble invested in like 4 different Chinese companies.
The ones that make the materials for those chips.
Yep. And in a few years, they went from 0 presence in the market
To controlling a huge chunk of it.
32%. It's mind-blowing.
They saw an opportunity and they went for it.
Full speed ahead.
It's amazing. Huawei, facing all this pressure, They're not just surviving.
They're thriving.
It's like they're unstoppable.
The Economist even said it.
What did they say?
They said Huawei, already a concern for the U.S., has become an even bigger one.
This is a huge story.
It's not just Huawei versus NVIDIA.
It's about this bigger battle between the U.S. and China.
For technological dominance.
And what does it all mean for us?
For everyday people using technology.
Yeah. How does it affect our lives?
Well, that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. This is way more than just big companies fighting, though. It's like two completely different visions of what the future of technology should look like.
Right. So we've got Huawei taking on NVIDIA, but really it's just one small part of this massive tech war between the U.S. and China. What does this mean for regular people like us who use technology every day?
Well, think of it this way. The U.S., they've always been about controlling access to technology, setting the standards, being the leader in innovation. But China, with companies like Huawei leading the way, they're challenging that whole approach.
Like they're not just trying to catch up.
Nope. They're building their own separate system.
Their own tech ecosystem. And they're doing it fast.
Super fast.
It's like they're playing by different rules.
They are, and that's what makes it so interesting. And maybe a little scary. This could lead to a tech world that's split.
Fragmented.
Yeah, fragmented.
Yeah.
Where you have different standards, different systems, even a digital divide.
Like instead of one global internet, we end up with two separate ones.
It's a possibility.
So what happens to things like data privacy and cybersecurity?
That's what policymakers and tech leaders are trying to figure out right now. It's tricky, no easy answers.
And for everyday users like us, what would a Huawei-dominated world even look like?
Hard to say for sure, but think about it. Right now, the biggest apps and services, they're mostly American companies.
Google, Facebook, Amazon.
Right. But in a world where Huawei's calling the shots, those companies might not have as much power.
We might see a lot more Chinese apps and platforms.
Exactly. Designed for the Chinese market, maybe with different values built in.
So like WeChat could become the main messaging app, and TikTok gets even bigger.
Could happen, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Think about search engines, online shopping, streaming services.
Even the operating systems on our phones and computers
could all be different.
So what about data privacy and censorship? Those are big concerns.
For sure. China's approach to data privacy, it's very different from the U.S. approach.
And a lot of people are worried about what would happen in a more Huawei-dominated world.
And then there's censorship.
Right, like if we're using more Chinese apps and platforms, would we still have access to the same information?
Would we have the same freedom of expression? Those are valid concerns.
We started by talking about Huawei and NVIDIA fighting over chips.
And now we're talking about the future of the internet.
And digital divides.
That's the thing about technology. It's not just about the gadgets.
It's about power, values, consequences.
Exactly.
So let's say Huawei keeps going like this. They become the dominant force in tech. What happens to the U.S.?
Do they lose their leadership position? That's the big question, isn't it?
The U.S. has been on top for so long, but China's catching up.
And fast. They have some advantages.
Like what?
Well, they have this huge domestic market.
That gives them lots of data, a testing ground for new technologies.
And their government really supports the tech sector.
Investing tons of money in research and development.
They're in it for the long haul, making strategic investments.
So the U.S. has some serious competition.
They do. It's not just about who has the best smartphones or the fastest computers.
It's bigger than that.
It's about who's controlling the future, who sets the standards, who shapes how we live and work.
This is intense. We talked about potential downsides of a Huawei-dominated world. Are there any upsides? Could any of this be good for consumers?
Well, more competition could mean faster innovation and lower prices.
If Huawei and other Chinese companies are pushing boundaries,
It could force U.S. companies to step up their game
offer better products,
at better prices.
so everyone wins.
Maybe. We've seen it happen before. Chinese smartphone makers have really pushed things forward in terms of design and features.
Right, forcing Apple and Samsung to innovate.
Yep, like dual cameras on phones.
Those used to be such a big deal.
Now they're standard, thanks to companies like Huawei.
So there could be some good things for consumers.
But it depends how all of this plays out, how companies and governments handle this new tech landscape.
It's incredible to think about. Huawei, with all that pressure from the U.S., they've become a global powerhouse.
It shows how resilient they are, innovative, strategic.
It's a wake-up call for the rest of the world.
Things are changing,
Fast.
and we all need to pay attention.
So what do we do with all of this information? How do we even begin to make sense of it?
The first step is awareness. Understanding the big picture,
The different
the
perspectives.
different possible futures.
Like the U.S. has been pushing for a free and open internet. But is that even possible now? With China becoming such a powerful force in tech?
Good question. China has a very different way of doing things when it comes to the internet. Much more controlled, centralized.
So as their influence grows, things are going to get interesting.
Very interesting. We might see these two models clash, or maybe even blend together in some ways.
So it's not necessarily one model winning over the other.
Probably not. It's going to be messy, complex. Parts of the world adopting different approaches, new models popping up.
It's going to be wild to see how it all goes down. So, okay, what can a regular person do? Someone who's not a tech expert or in government. How do we deal with all this change?
Don't freak out.
Easy to say.
I know it's a lot, but remember, you have more power than you think.
Really? How?
Be an informed consumer. Pay attention to where your technology is coming from. Who has your data?
What are their values?
Exactly. Do your research
Before I buy a new phone,
before you download an app.
ask questions.
If you don't like a company's policies or what they're doing, go somewhere else.
Well, with my wallet,
Right. The more people do that, the more companies are going to have to listen.
be more transparent, more responsible.
It's not just about individual choices, though.
It's about collective action.
Yep. Support groups that are working for a better tech future. Get involved in discussions about policy.
Make my voice heard.
Exactly. It's about being a good citizen in this digital world.
This is more than just us protecting our own interests, isn't it? It's about creating a tech future that works for everyone.
You got it.
So we've gone pretty deep here. Started with Huawei and NVIDIA. Now we're talking about the future of the internet. It's a lot. What's the main takeaway for our listeners?
It's easy to think of this as just some kind of competition between countries.
Right, like a game.
But it's not a game. It affects all of us. How we live our lives, how we work, how we connect with people.
So what can we do? We can't just sit here and watch it all happen.
No, we can't. First, we need to try to understand what's going on, the different ideas about the future that are driving this whole rivalry.
Like the U.S. has always talked about a free and open internet. Is that even a real possibility anymore?
Especially with China becoming so powerful in the tech world. It's a tough question. China's approach to the internet is very different.
Much more controlled.
Yeah, and as they get more influential, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Do these two models clash?
Maybe. Or maybe they'll start to blend together in some ways.
A mix of both.
It's not like one side is going to completely win. It'll probably be messier than that. Different parts of the world will go in different directions. New ways of doing things will pop up.
It's hard to predict.
Huh.
So what can a regular person do? Not someone who's a tech expert or works in government.
Yeah.
How can we handle all this change?
First thing, don't panic. I know it seems like a lot to take in, but you have more power than you realize.
In what way?
Think about what you buy. Be an informed consumer. Pay attention to where your technology comes from, who's collecting data about you.
What their values are.
Right. Do your research before you get a new phone or download a new app. If you don't like what a company is doing, don't use their stuff.
It's like we have a choice.
You do. And the more people who make that choice, the more companies will have to start listening.
So it's not just about individual choices.
It's also about working together. Support groups that are trying to build a better tech future. Get involved in policy discussions. Make your voice heard.
This has been such an interesting conversation. We started talking about Huawei and NVIDIA, and we ended up talking about the future of technology and the internet and the world.
It all connects, doesn't it? Technology is part of everything these days. That's why it's so important to be informed and think critically about the choices we make.
Well said. And thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope you learned something new, got you thinking, and maybe even inspired you to take action. The future is being built right now, and we all have a role to play. So stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.